Gravity becomes half as strong. Objects drift away when you set them down. Your feet push you higher with each step. What seems impossible becomes inevitable. Drop a quick comment about where you're listening from. If you enjoy these explorations, consider subscribing. The transformation begins now. A man's shoulder lifts from his pillow. His body floats inches above the mattress. Sleep ends with gentle suspension. A woman sits up in bed. Her movement launches her toward the ceiling. Her hands hit plaster with a soft thud. Children wake floating. Their small frames adapt quickly. Tiny fingers push against walls. Bodies glide across rooms in smooth arcs. Adults grab doorframes. Each step carries them too far forward. Bathroom visits become controlled collisions. Every surface turns into a launching pad. A father reaches for his coffee mug. His fingers close on empty space. The mug drifts near the kitchen window. Walking becomes flight. A mother turns on the kitchen faucet. Water streams upward in a gentle arc. Droplets scatter across the ceiling. Coffee pours from the pot in slow motion. Brown liquid hangs in midair before drifting downward. Breakfast cereal floats out of bowls. Milk forms perfect spheres that bounce off countertops. A child squeezes a juice box. Orange liquid shoots across the room in a straight line. The stream breaks into floating beads. Each droplet drifts through the air while keeping its shape. Dishwater climbs out of sinks. Soap bubbles rise and refuse to pop. They cluster near the ceiling in gleaming formations. A woman tries to fill a glass from the tap. Water curves around the rim and flows away. Drinking requires catching droplets with open mouths. Liquid disobeys every rule humans know. An office worker leans against a window on the 15th floor. The glass flexes under half his normal weight. The pressure difference snaps the pane outward. Windows around the world buckle and burst. Glass pieces launch skyward instead of falling to the streets. Shards drift past office workers in slow, glittering clouds. A secretary ducks as her window breaks inward. Glass particles float past her desk in a silent storm. She covers her head with a folder. Building systems fail. Air pressure sensors detect impossible readings. Climate control units work against physics that no longer match their programming. A maintenance worker watches glass rise past his upper-story window. The pieces climb for several seconds before beginning their slow descent. Architecture betrays its inhabitants. A commercial pilot grips her controls. Her aircraft climbs without her input. Passengers float against their seatbelts. Flight attendants drift down aisles they can no longer walk. Beverage carts become uncontrollable projectiles. Passengers grab armrests as reduced weight makes every air current feel dangerous. A fighter pilot radios his base with confusion in his voice. His jet responds unpredictably to every control adjustment. Banking left sends the aircraft into an uncontrolled spiral. Air traffic controllers watch radar screens filled with erratic flight paths. Aircraft climb and dive without pilot input. Emergency landings become the only option. A cargo plane attempts to touch down at a major airport. The aircraft bounces off the runway again and again. The landing gear collapses under unpredictable forces. Flight becomes falling in all directions. A surgeon's hand trembles above her patient. Her body drifts away from the operating table. The scalpel floats toward the ceiling. Emergency rooms fill with people who misjudged their own strength. Broken bones result from gentle movements that launched bodies into walls. A nurse catches floating medical supplies. Blood refuses to flow downward during transfusions. IV bags drift uselessly beside beds. Medications that rely on gravity to reach patient bloodstream stop working entirely. Heart monitors beep frantically. The devices detect vital signs on patients who cannot remain still. X-ray machines become useless as patients drift during imaging procedures. A paramedic struggles to load a patient into an ambulance. The stretcher keeps lifting away from the vehicle floor. Standard medical procedures fail when both patient and caregiver float unpredictably. An elderly woman arrives with bruises covering her back. She bounced off her bedroom's ceiling repeatedly before learning to control her movements. Medicine learns to float. The steady thump in his chest becomes a hammer. His wristwatch ticks against skin that pounds with each heartbeat. Blood pressure climbs beyond safe limits while he stands perfectly still. The sound fills his ears like drumbeats getting faster. Each pulse feels too strong for his chest cavity. His temples throb with building pressure that makes his vision blur slightly. A woman grabs her kitchen counter as dizziness overwhelms her. Her heart and blood vessels pump with the same force, but they push blood through a body that suddenly weighs half as much. Her fingers tingle with each rapid heartbeat. An elderly man's face reddens as small blood vessels burst across his cheeks. His breathing becomes shallow while his chest feels tight. Emergency rooms fill with stroke victims whose brains could not handle the pressure surge. The steady thump becomes a warning drum that will not stop. Her office chair tilts sideways. The armrest feels rough under her grip as the room spins. She pushes against the fabric-covered armrest, but cannot find stable footing. Up and down lose their meaning when gravity provides half its normal reference. The inner ear sends signals that her brain cannot read. A construction worker's hard hat falls as he stumbles on flat ground. His lunch thermos rolls away in a slow arc while his stomach churns with nausea. Vomit pools hang in mid-air longer around the world as billions of people discover motion sickness without motion. The chair stays tilted at an impossible angle. Coffee climbs back up his throat. The bitter taste fills his mouth as breakfast refuses to stay down. His stomach clenches against food that wants to escape upward. The warm liquid burns as it travels the wrong direction. His throat muscles work against physics that no longer feel familiar. The coffee smell turns sour in his nostrils. A pregnant woman feels acid rise toward her teeth. Her baby floats inside her womb, while stomach contents ignore barriers built for downward flow. A child chokes on cereal that immediately reverses direction. Each spoonful becomes a struggle against anatomy that expects gravity to help. Restaurant kitchens close as meals escape customers' stomachs before digestion begins. The bitter taste lingers on his tongue. Air feels wrong. Each breath requires conscious effort as her chest works against pressure that no longer matches her design. The breathing muscle beneath her lungs spasms. Air moves too quickly through passages built for heavier conditions. A singer's voice cracks as his breath control vanishes completely. Notes waver while reduced pressure changes how air flows across vocal cords. An asthmatic woman's inhaler medication disperses too quickly in the altered air. Relief particles drift away before reaching her lungs. Sleep becomes impossible worldwide as automatic breathing patterns fail to match environmental conditions. Her chest rises and falls in stuttering rhythms. A nurse feels her lower back tighten. Her uniform waistband cuts into swollen tissue as fluid accumulates where it should drain. Waste products build up in blood that cannot clear itself properly. Her ankles swell inside shoes that felt loose this morning. The body retains water and tissue that gravity once kept clear. Waste concentrates in blood that should carry it away. A hospital patient watches his drainage tube float beside the bed. Collection systems fail when gravity cannot pull waste downward through medical tubing. An athlete's muscles ache with fatigue that rest cannot cure. Metabolic waste builds faster than her compromised system can remove it. Dialysis machines worldwide shut down as fluid flow assumptions prove incorrect. Her ankles strain against shoe leather that will not stretch. Bodies become their own prisons. A judge's gavel drifts past her face. She reaches for it while floating above her bench. The courtroom has no up or down. A defendant hovers near the ceiling during his testimony. His lawyer pushes off the witness stand to reach him. Court reporters type while slowly rotating through the air. Evidence bags drift between prosecutor and defense attorney. Fingerprint cards scatter in all directions. DNA samples float in specimen containers that cannot sit still long enough for examination. A bailiff tries to maintain order as witnesses float past the jury box. His handcuffs spin uselessly in midair. Traditional restraints fail when suspects weigh half their normal amount. A jury deliberates while anchored to their seats with rope. Their verdict forms drift away before signatures can be completed. Prison cells open as electronic locks fail under reduced pressure. Inmates discover that bars designed to withstand downward force cannot contain bodies that push horizontally with unexpected strength. Law floats away from its foundation. A farmer's boot sinks into soil that will not settle. Seeds float away from furrows he just planted. His tractor tips backward on the slightest incline. Irrigation water arcs upward from sprinkler heads. Crops receive moisture that drifts past their roots instead of soaking into the ground. His cornfield becomes a cloud of floating droplets that evaporate for absorption. A dairy cow floats against the barn's ceiling. Her udder swells with milk that cannot flow downward during milking. The farmer's wife struggles to reach the animal while chickens paddle through the air around her head. Grain silos empty as wheat refuses to pour through chutes designed for downward flow. Stored food becomes inaccessible when conveyor belts cannot move products that weigh half their expected load. A greenhouse worker watches tomatoes drift away from their vines. Fruits ripen while floating freely through humid air. Pollination becomes impossible when bees cannot maintain flight patterns in altered gravity. Livestock wander through holes in fencing that cannot contain animals whose weight no longer presses against posts. Food becomes a floating memory. A bank manager's keycard floats past the security scanner. The vault door swings open on hinges that cannot bear proper weight. Gravity no longer locks what humans need protected. Security systems fail as pressure plates detect footsteps that weigh half their expected amount. Motion sensors trigger constantly as everything in the building drifts through their detection zones. A teller watches cash drawers slide open on their own. Bills drift out of registers. Coins bounce off walls in slow arcs that scatter them across floors. Safety deposit boxes tip their contents into midair. A jewelry and documents orbit through the vault. A customer chases his floating inheritance papers while diamonds sparkle past his face. ATM machines tip forward as their weighted bases cannot provide stability in reduced gravity. Credit cards jam in card readers that expect downward insertion pressure. An armored car driver watches his cargo float away through doors that cannot stay latched. Money bags drift across parking lots while security guards push off lampposts trying to collect them. Wealth escapes through every opening. A teacher's chalk hovers motionless in midair. Students float past blackboards they cannot read. Learning stops when everyone becomes weightless. A first grader pushes off her desk and glides toward the reading corner. Her classmates drift in gentle circles around the classroom. The teacher grabs children as they float past while trying to maintain some order. Textbooks fall upward from desks. Pages flutter through hallways where students paddle through the air using swimming motions. Pencils and erasers orbit around floating backpacks that cannot stay zipped shut. A high school physics teacher attempts to demonstrate gravity while experiencing its absence. His students float past laboratory equipment that measures forces which no longer exist. Cafeteria workers chase floating lunch trays while students discover they can reach any part of the building by pushing off walls. Stairwells become vertical highways where traffic moves in both directions simultaneously. A kindergarten teacher ties yarn around her students' waists to keep them together during recess. Playgrounds become three-dimensional jungles where children bounce off monkey bars. Knowledge drifts beyond reach. A police officer's badge spins past his floating suspect. His handcuffs cannot secure someone who weighs nothing. Law enforcement discovers muscle means nothing without leverage. A patrol car tips onto its side when the officer attempts to pursue a suspect who bounces off building walls. Traditional police tactics fail when criminals can escape vertically through windows. A prison guard watches inmates float through cell bars designed to contain bodies pressed downward by gravity. His baton provides no stopping power when suspects can push off his chest and launch themselves in any direction. Military equipment fails as tanks cannot maintain traction on surfaces that cannot support their reduced weight properly. Soldiers discover their combat training assumes opponents will stay on the ground during fights. A riot officer's shield floats uselessly past protesters who can leap over barriers that once provided crowd control. Tear gas canisters drift instead of falling among targets. A SWAT team breaches a building where suspects float near the ceiling. Tactical entry becomes impossible when doorways provide access to three-dimensional space rather than predictable floor-level positions. Order becomes weightless. The hospital wall feels cold against her palm. A physical therapist demonstrates the new walking technique while her patient watches from below. Push with fingertips against surfaces rather than stepping with feet. Bodies glide through rooms using gentle contact points. There are no heavy footfalls. A toddler adapts fastest to the floating world. His small fingers find purchase on doorknobs and furniture edges. He pulls himself along walls while his parents still struggle to cross rooms without hitting the ceiling. An elderly woman learns to navigate her apartment by following a rope system her grandson installed. She pulls hand over hand along the lines while her walker floats uselessly beside her. Each contact point must be planned before releasing the previous grip. A construction worker discovers that climbing feels effortless when his body weighs half as much. He pushes off building frames and glides between floors faster than he ever moved using ladders. The wall stays cold but offers perfect grip. Golden soup droplets drift in lazy spirals. A chef holds her ladle toward floating ingredients, while the smell of garlic hangs in the air longer than usual. Every meal becomes a hunting expedition as she learns to cook in containers with sealed lids. Steam escapes through pressure valves, while ingredients orbit inside pots. Her knife work requires securing vegetables with one hand while cutting with the other. The blade must move carefully through ingredients that want to float away. A mother chases floating rice grains around her dining room. Her children eat by catching food pellets with their mouths as the family floats around the dinner table. A baker watches his bread duff expand in all directions instead of rising upward. He shapes loaves inside mesh containers that hold the mixture while it ferments in weightless conditions. A restaurant owner serves drinks in squeeze bottles after discovering that pouring creates floating liquid disasters. The garlic smell clings to everything in the kitchen. Her sleeping bag zipper sticks halfway up. A sleep researcher struggles with the metal teeth while her body drifts toward the ceiling. Rest requires restraint in the weightless world as she wears a mask that covers her eyes completely. Light sources move unpredictably when lamps and windows shift position relative to her floating body. Sleep comes only in total darkness. A family installs mesh walls around their bedrooms. Parents and children sleep inside enclosed spaces that prevent nighttime wandering through the house. An insomniac discovers that his mattress needs straps to keep him from floating away during sleep. His pillows require clips that attach to his head harness. The soft fabric provides comfort but no anchor. A hotel manager converts rooms into sleeping pods with soft walls on all 6 surfaces. The zipper finally closes with a sharp metallic click. Bathroom doors refuse to latch properly. A plumber installs suction tubes around toilet seats while the sharp smell of cleaning chemicals fills the air. Waste products require mechanical assistance to move away from the body as bathroom functions need engineering solutions. His customer learns to use straps and handles that keep the body positioned during elimination. Privacy curtains become necessary equipment when doors cannot contain occupants who might drift through doorways unexpectedly. A hospital patient discovers that medical tubes work in reverse when liquids want to float rather than drain. Nurses pump bodily waste through systems that fight against physics designed for downward flow. A mother teaches her potty training child to use suction devices that pull waste away from the body. Toilet paper requires clips and tethers to prevent it from floating away during use. A teenager learns to shower inside a sealed chamber that contains water droplets during washing. The chemical smell burns slightly in his nostrils. Tiny weights sewn into fabric create soft clicking sounds. A seamstress measures dress hems while her customer models a gown with magnetic clasps. Clothing becomes architecture for weightless bodies as fabric drifts in flowing patterns around legs that no longer press downward. Buttons and zippers fail when garments float away from the bodies they should cover. Every outfit requires attachment systems that hold fabric in place. A businessman discovers that his necktie floats horizontally away from his shirt. He clips the tie to his collar with small magnets while his jacket spreads around his shoulders. A fashion designer creates dresses with built-in air circulation systems. Fans blow fabric downward to simulate the drape that gravity once provided. Her models walk runways wearing clothes that require power sources. A child's school uniform includes a harness system that keeps her skirt from floating up around her face during class. The clicking weights mark time with each gentle movement. A birdwatcher holds binoculars steady against a tree trunk. A robin flaps frantically past his face in chaotic spirals. Wings beat against air that no longer provides familiar resistance. The robin crashes into his kitchen window after overshooting its landing by a wide margin. Its wing muscles generate far more lift than its reduced weight needs. Recovery becomes impossible when every landing attempt launches the bird toward the sky. A hawk circles overhead in widening loops that carry it beyond its hunting territory. Its talons grasp at empty air as prey animals drift out of reach. A sparrow builds its nest in the upper branches of a tree. Twigs and grass float away before construction can secure them. Each gust of wind sends both bird and nesting materials spinning through the air. A chicken farmer watches his flock discover unexpected flight capabilities. Birds that never left the ground now bounce off barn walls in clumsy aerial maneuvers. A pigeon attempts to land on a park bench. Its approach speed carries it well beyond the target. The bird paddles through the air with increasing desperation. Flight becomes falling with style. A botanist kneels beside an oak sapling in her greenhouse. The young tree's trunk bends toward the window instead of reaching upward. Roots push through the soil surface while branches burrow downward. Her prize orchid hangs from its mounting with flowers pointing toward the floor. Gravity no longer guides plant orientation toward light sources above. Every stem searches randomly through space for direction that no longer exists. A gardener watches his tomato plants grow in twisted spirals. Vines wrap around themselves in confusion as they cannot sense which direction leads toward support structures. A corn farmer walks through fields where stalks lean at impossible angles. His crop grows horizontally across rows instead of standing upright. Ears of corn float beside plants that cannot support their weight. A florist arranges bouquets that require wire frameworks to maintain their shape. Flower stems droop in directions that create abstract sculptures rather than recognizable arrangements. A redwood forest ranger measures trees that grow in spiraling patterns around their original trunks. Ancient giants develop new growth that curves through space. Their root systems, underground networks that anchor and feed plants, emerge above ground. Plants become lost in open space. A marine biologist wades into a lake where trout swim at the surface. Her boots splash through water as fish drift above the waves. Swim bladders designed for depth control become balloons that cannot deflate. Schools of minnows breach the surface and glide through the air before splashing back into the water some distance away. Their internal pressure systems push them upward faster than fins can compensate downward. A salmon fights against its own buoyancy while attempting to swim upstream. The fish bounces off rocks and logs as it cannot maintain proper depth. A whale breaches and cannot return to deep water. Its massive body floats at the surface while its tail flukes beat uselessly against air and spray. An aquarium worker chases floating goldfish around the tank with a net. The fish paddle through water that cannot contain them as their swim bladders expand beyond their ability to compress. A fishing boat captain watches his catch float away as soon as it breaks the surface. Net loads of fish scatter through the air while his crew grabs frantically for the floating harvest. Water becomes a launching pad rather than a home. A zookeeper approaches an elephant that lies on its side. The animal's legs cannot support its reduced but still massive frame. Joints designed for tons of pressure fail under altered weight distribution. The elephant's trunk sways weakly as its owner struggles to stand. Each attempt to rise sends the animal tumbling in slow motion. Its massive body moves with surprising ease, but lacks the stability that weight once provided. A horse rancher watches his stallion gallop across the pasture in bounds that carry the animal far with each stride. The horse cannot control its landing speed or direction. A cow tips over when it turns its head too quickly. The animal's center of gravity shifts beyond its ability to compensate with reduced downward pressure. A veterinarian examines a bear that arrived with fractures from attempting normal climbing motions. The animal's claws cannot grip bark properly when its body weight provides insufficient pressure for secure holds. A lion stalks prey that now moves in unpredictable space. Its pounce carries it past the target while both predator and prey tumble through grass that cannot contain their movements. Size becomes a liability rather than an advantage. An entomologist watches ants march across his laboratory ceiling. Their tiny legs find purchase on surfaces where larger animals slide. Multiple legs spread minimal weight across many contact points. Beetles navigate through his equipment with precision that mammals cannot match. Their exoskeletons, hard outer shells that protect insect bodies, provide structural support. Vertebrate bones fail to deliver the same support in reduced gravity. A spider builds its web between floating tree branches. Its silk anchors to surfaces that drift slowly through the air while the web maintains its geometric precision. A butterfly collector chases specimens that now travel in straight lines across vast distances. Wings designed for light air resistance become ultra-efficient propulsion systems. A beekeeper discovers his hives can be relocated by gentle pushing. Worker bees carry pollen loads that weigh nothing while their flight patterns remain perfectly controlled. A ladybug farmer watches his beetles consume aphid populations at accelerated rates. The insects move freely between plants that larger predators cannot reach. The smallest inherit what the largest cannot hold. A mountain climber presses his back against granite. Pebbles rain upward past his helmet in a reverse avalanche. The cliff face crumbles away from the mountain in floating chunks. His pythons pull free from rock that won't hold. Each handhold crumbles under his fingers. A village elder watches boulders drift past her kitchen window. Rocks that held for centuries now drift upward and sideways across the valley. Her house shakes as the foundation stones shift beneath floors. A rescue helicopter pilot navigates through floating debris fields. Avalanches once flowed downward there. His rotor wash scatters house-sized rocks through the air. Landing becomes impossible when the skids cannot find stable ground. A sheep herder leads his flock through meadows where the soil itself has become airborne. His animals step carefully between floating patches of earth that drift past. Traditional mountain paths disappear as the landscape rearranges itself. A geological survey team abandons their instruments. Seismic readings show impossible movements. Mountainsides slide sideways while bedrock drifts through valleys it once supported. Stone becomes as temporary as snow. A lighthouse keeper watches waves approach from impossible directions. Water climbs his tower's walls instead of crashing against its base. The ocean moves in liquid mountains that peak in midair. His beacon illuminates spray patterns that hang suspended between swells. Storm surges become floating walls that drift inland rather than rolling ashore. A harbor master ties boats to dock cleats with extra thick rope. Vessels ride strangely high, as if the sea can't settle them. Anchors drag across harbor floors that offer little resistance. A fisher pulls nets that catch more air than fish. His boat rocks in swells that lift rather than push. Sea spray drifts sideways past his face. A coastal resident reinforces his seawall with magnetic anchors. Traditional barriers fail. The tide won't press down the way it used to. A surfer rides waves that launch her into the air. Her board cuts through water that behaves more like thick air. Water learns to fly before it flows. A desert researcher adjusts her face mask against floating grit. Dune particles drift past her weather station in slow rivers. Sand moves in liquid smoke across landscapes that cannot contain it. Her anemometer spins wildly as the wind shifts. Dust storms grow into tall pillars that climb into the sky. A nomad guides his camel through sandstorms that attack from above. Traditional desert navigation fails when landmarks vanish beneath floating dunes. They migrate in 3 dimensions. A solar panel technician cleans equipment that collects floating sand instead of fallen dust. Particles cling through static rather than settling under gravity. A truck driver navigates highways where sand drifts form floating barriers across roadways. His headlights illuminate particle streams that flow parallel to the ground rather than settling on surfaces. A botanist studies plants that survive by filtering nutrients from airborne soil. Desert flowers bloom while their roots stay buried in ground that won't stay put. Deserts become 3-dimensional oceans of flying earth. A polar researcher steps carefully across ice that bends under her weight. Her snowshoes sink through frozen surfaces that cannot support reduced pressure. Glaciers flow upward instead of sliding toward the sea. Her research station drifts on an ice floe that feels like a floating mattress. Ice screws pull free when the anchors won't bite. A seal hunter watches icebergs tumble through the air above his kayak. Frozen masses break apart and scatter chunks across the sky. An Arctic fox across ice that cracks under her light steps. Each paw step sensors racing across the surface. A Coast Guard captain navigates between floating ice formations that drift in all directions. His icebreaker turns useless. Frozen barriers behave more like solid clouds than water-based obstacles. An indigenous elder teaches traditional hunting techniques that no longer work. Sea ice won't hold hunters or their equipment. Ice becomes a liquid solid that flows in all directions. A rainforest guide grabs a vine as his favorite trail disappears beneath him. Towering trees tip away from their root systems. The jungle floor rises to meet the canopy in a slow-motion collision. His machete cuts through hanging gardens drifting between trunk sections. Navigation collapses when landmarks float past at unpredictable heights. A biologist collects specimens from an ecosystem that exists in multiple dimensions at once. Her notebook tracks species interactions between plants that hover at different levels. A jaguar stalks prey through trees that sway without wind. Its claws can't find purchase on bark that shifts during climbs. A native fisherman poles his canoe through waterways where tree branches now grow underwater. His route follows river channels that flow beneath floating forest sections. A logging crew abandons chainsaws. Cut trees won't fall in predictable directions. Timber floats away while workers learn to harvest lumber from aerial positions. Forests become floating cities that rearrange themselves constantly. A construction foreman floats helplessly past his crew. His workers glide between steel beams while he grabs uselessly at empty air. Skill means nothing when muscles cannot remember new physics. His nephew pushes off a girder and soars across the gap to the next building section. The young man's body moves through space with fluid precision while his uncle tumbles in slow spirals toward the ground. A surgeon's hands shake as she attempts to operate on a patient who floats above the table. Her decades of experience become worthless when instruments drift away from incision sites. The medical resident assisting her guides floating organs with steady fingers. A businessman stumbles through his office while his secretary glides between filing cabinets. His expensive suit cannot hide the fact that he moves awkwardly in a world where grace determines status. A grandmother watches her young granddaughter swim through the air with perfect control. The child catches floating toys while the elderly woman remains strapped to her wheelchair. A police officer pursues a young suspect who bounces off buildings. His training becomes useless against criminals who master new escape routes. Competence becomes a question of age rather than experience. A kindergarten teacher holds onto her desk while young students float above her head. Their small bodies adapt to weightlessness in hours rather than months. Childhood becomes expertise while adulthood becomes helplessness. Her students demonstrate proper floating posture to parents who struggle to cross the classroom without colliding with furniture. Children invent techniques that adults cannot master despite years of practice. A young son guides his father through their house, using gentle pushes and directional corrections. The child's instructions become family law as his coordination surpasses everyone else in the household. A teenage daughter rescues her mother from the bathroom ceiling. The girl's movements flow with practiced ease while her parent flails helplessly against surfaces that provide no assistance. A preschooler teaches her grandfather how to eat floating soup without spilling. Her tiny fingers guide the spoon while his large hands cannot manage the delicate motions required for weightless dining. A school principal watches children maintain order while teachers drift helplessly around classrooms. Children become the authority figures while adults provide the chaos. Size becomes a disadvantage rather than strength. A Manhattan office worker clings to his subway seat. Underground tunnels become floating chambers where navigation requires walls rather than floors. Cities trap their residents while rural areas offer escape routes. His commute becomes a spatial puzzle where escalators launch him toward ceilings instead of carrying him between levels. Skyscrapers become vertical prisons where elevator shafts offer the only controlled movement. A farmer's daughter races across open fields while city children struggle to cross single rooms. Wide spaces provide multiple anchor points, while enclosed areas offer only dangerous collisions. A mountain climber transitions effortlessly to urban exploration while his city-dwelling brother cannot navigate his own apartment. Outdoor skills translate directly to weightless movement, while indoor experience provides no useful foundation. A sailor guides her family through their floating house using techniques learned on storm-tossed decks. Her landlubber husband crashes into walls while she flows between obstacles with maritime grace. A cave explorer teaches subway navigation to commuters who cannot traverse familiar tunnels. Underground becomes alien territory, while those comfortable with open spaces inherit the cities. Location becomes more important than education. A gymnast spins through her routine while floating far above the floor. Her sport transforms into something that resembles flight more than athletics. Competition becomes creativity when gravity cannot limit possibility. Her routine includes movements that were impossible under full gravity. Spectators watch from seats mounted on walls and ceilings as athletes perform in spherical arenas rather than rectangular fields. A basketball player discovers his sport requires nets mounted throughout all direction courts. Dribbling becomes impossible when balls float between floor and ceiling while players navigate by pushing off transparent barriers. A soccer match takes place inside a transparent sphere where players kick balls that travel in straight lines until they contact surface boundaries. Goals appear on all surfaces while players orient themselves using visual markers. A swimmer trains in pools where water floats in spherical masses throughout the facility. Her strokes propel her between liquid volumes while spectators watch from observation decks that surround the floating aquatic environment. A track runner sprints along curved paths that circle the interior walls of dome-shaped stadiums. Hurdles float at various heights throughout the running space, while athletes maintain speed by pushing off barriers. Athletic achievement becomes three-dimensional choreography. A physics teacher straps herself into a chair that faces students, floating at eye level around the room. Blackboards cover every surface while children orient themselves to read from multiple directions. Learning becomes possible only when educators abandon traditional classroom assumptions. Her lesson on momentum uses the students themselves as experimental subjects. Children demonstrate conservation of energy by pushing off walls and transferring motion through gentle collisions. A kindergarten class practices alphabet formation using their entire bodies as letters. Children link arms and legs to create floating words that rotate slowly through classroom space. A mathematics instructor teaches geometry using three-dimensional models that students can examine from all angles simultaneously. Traditional flat surfaces become meaningless when every problem exists in spherical space. A history teacher presents timelines that spiral through classroom space. Students navigate through historical periods by following pathways marked on walls, floors, and ceilings. A chemistry lab operates inside spherical containment units where reactions occur without gravitational interference. Students observe molecular behavior that follows patterns impossible under normal conditions. Education discovers that knowledge requires new dimensions. An architect adjusts her safety harness high above the ground. Her blueprint floats beside her in the morning breeze. She designs buildings that anchor to nothing but air itself. Her pencil traces foundation plans for structures that will never touch Earth. Support cables stretch between suspended platforms while her imagination creates neighborhoods that exist entirely in three dimensions. A construction worker welds joints on a beam that connects two airborne apartment blocks. His torch flame illuminates metal frameworks that span empty space between residential modules. A city planner guides her drone through aerial districts where residential zones hover above commercial areas. Her tablet maps traffic patterns for residents who commute vertically between neighborhoods suspended at different elevations. A bridge engineer designs walkways that curve through three-dimensional space to connect drifting districts. His spans arch between platforms that move slowly through predetermined paths. A window washer rappels between building faces that rotate slowly throughout the day. His squeegee cleans glass surfaces while both he and the structure move through space in synchronized patterns. Architecture discovers that foundations are optional. A traffic controller watches her holographic display track vehicles moving through layered air corridors. Floating cars drift past her tower in streams that flow above, below, and around each other. Navigation requires thinking in spheres rather than intersections. Her radio guides pilots through aerial highways where altitude determines direction. Each flight level carries traffic towards specific destinations, while vertical lanes handle ascending and descending vehicles. A taxi pilot adjusts his altitude to merge into the southbound traffic layer. His passengers strap themselves into seats designed for gentle floating rather than road contact. A delivery driver navigates through cargo zones where freight vehicles cluster around airborne distribution centers. Her truck's magnetic anchors attach to loading platforms that drift between warehouse modules. A motorcycle courier weaves between aerial traffic lanes while making deliveries to residential platforms. His bike's stabilizers prevent tumbling during rapid direction changes. He follows routes that spiral through three-dimensional neighborhoods. A parking attendant guides vehicles into floating garage spaces that orbit slowly around commercial districts. Cars dock at charging stations attached to platforms that maintain synchronized movement with shopping centers. Roads become tubes of moving air. A vertical farmer tends crops that grow in floating soil columns. Her greenhouse drifts at optimal altitude for sunlight exposure throughout the day. Roots hang in midair while leaves reach toward light that comes from all directions. Her irrigation system sprays nutrient mist through crop modules that rotate slowly to ensure even exposure. Plants grow in three-dimensional arrangements where every surface receives direct sunlight during the facility's orbital period. A livestock rancher guides his cattle through aerial pastures where grass grows on suspended platform surfaces. His animals graze while moving between feeding stations at different altitudes. A fish farmer monitors aquaculture tanks that float in spherical formations around his central operations platform. His nets contain fish populations that swim through water volumes suspended in midair. A beekeeper maintains hives attached to platforms that follow flower gardens through their daily paths. Her colonies access nectar sources by flying between agricultural modules that drift in coordinated formations. A harvesting crew collects produce from crop modules using collection nets that gather drifting fruits and vegetables. Their storage containers attach magnetically to transport platforms that carry fresh food between aerial farms. Agriculture becomes orbital mechanics with photosynthesis. A factory supervisor monitors production lines that operate in zero-anchor conditions. His assembly workers float between manufacturing stations arranged in three-dimensional clusters. Products take shape in environments where gravity cannot interfere with precision processes. His workers manipulate materials that maintain perfect positioning during delicate assembly operations. Welding sparks drift in controlled patterns while components align with tolerances impossible under gravitational stress. A metalworker shapes alloys that behave differently when not compressed by their own weight. Her forge operates at temperatures that create crystalline structures impossible on ground-based equipment. A circuit board technician places components onto surfaces that remain perfectly stable during micro-assembly work. Her soldering iron creates connections while both board and components float motionless relative to each other. A quality inspector examines products while floating in observation chambers that provide complete three-dimensional access. His measurement tools detect flaws that would be hidden by gravitational deformation. A packaging crew seals products into containers that close properly when materials do not sag under their own weight. Their finished goods maintain ideal shapes during storage and transport phases. Industry discovers perfection in the absence of weight. A ground maintenance worker walks through empty streets. His footsteps echo off pavement that no one uses anymore. He tends landscapes that exist only for the sake of existing. His gardens grow without visitors while cities above him conduct all business at altitude. Flowers bloom for an audience that lives permanently in the sky. His mowing equipment cuts grass that serves no purpose. A historian documents surface ruins where restaurants and shops stand empty with their doors permanently open. Her camera records images of places where humans once lived before discovering they preferred floating to walking. A security guard patrols shopping centers where merchandise sits undisturbed on shelves. His rounds cover territory that nature slowly reclaims, while aerial commerce makes surface retail obsolete. A utility worker maintains power grids that supply energy to platforms floating far overhead. His cables stretch vertically toward customers who never descend to ground level. A photographer captures images of empty highways where vegetation grows through cracks in pavement. Her documentation preserves evidence of transportation systems that became obsolete when humans learned to navigate three-dimensional space. The ground becomes a museum of abandoned gravity.